Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 59. Today we rejoin Professor Challenger and his intrepid party as they reach the Lost World in the second of our three-part discussion of the celebrated novel. And here's Paul to recap on events so far.
After the scientific and media establishments of London have dismissed the claims of the eccentric and controversial Professor Challenger to have discovered a hidden South American plateau where prehistoric forms of life still exist, he has assembled a small team of independent observers to prove the veracity of his assertions. The journalist narrator Edward Malone, the comparative anatomist Professor Summerlee, and the hunter-adventurer Lord John Roxton duly cross the Atlantic aboard the liner Francisca to Manaus, from where they will retrace Challenger's route into the Amazonian interior. But upon arrival, when they open the envelope containing his instructions, a surprise awaits them. And this is only the first of many unexpected developments to welcome them into this strange new world.
So this episode we're going to be looking at chapters 7 to 14 of The Lost World, which were first serialised in the UK in the Strand magazine between May and October 1912, with those illustrations by Harry Rowntree and the wonderful fake material that we talked about last time that Conan Doyle himself provided. If you're following it in the novel, you'll be absolutely fine. If you're following it with the Strand serializations, one of the weird things about the Strand serialization is that it sometimes ends mid-chapter. So we'll be going through the issues that were pretty much from June 1912 through to October 1912. And we kickstart in Chapter 7, Tomorrow We Disappear into the Unknown, where the party have finally arrived in South America. And we start by learning a bit more about Summerlee and John Roxton. And this is where I think we get more of that information about Roxton based on Casement. There's quite a lot of the Casement stuff here, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. It's as we explained in the last episode, it wasn't so long after Conan Doyle had been involved in the Congo controversy that he was writing The Lost World. Roger Casement, as British representative in the Congo, had kicked up a bit of a fuss about the way it was administered, if that's a fair way of putting it, under King Leopold II of the Belgians. And Casement became, from that point onwards, known as a campaigner. And the British government dispatched him then to look into rubber plantations in South America for the same sort of problem. So Roxton is echoing this with when we get his exploits, going out to South America to basically deal with the slave gangs out there. Yeah. But unlike Casement, he goes readily armed with a rifle and starts his own private war.
Yes. And we're going to see much more of that in the course of this episode, I think, as well. This becomes the signature part of Roxton's character. The other people that we're introduced to there at the beginning of this chapter are the wider party who will accompany Roxton into the unknown. And this is where we have to front something out, very obvious in this book, which is that there is a lot of content here which, to our present eyes, and indeed to many people at the time, I should think, is distinctly racist. And if you look at the wider party here, you have Zambo, who is described as a Negro. We have Gomez and his friend who are described as half-breeds. And then we have a party of native peoples who actually are only ever referred to. Only one of them really has a name that's given to them, which is actually the name of their tribe. So, this is part of the difficulty of dealing, I think, with the Lost World these days, is that there is inherently this racism within the book that we have to confront and acknowledge right from the beginning, because it is going to carry throughout the rest of the novel.
It's obviously typical of this sort of fiction at this time. These are genre tropes, and they're just attitudes that are readily accepted. Unfortunately, so we just have these generalized characters. The South American the characters tend to be there just as bearers, and usually people to be bumped off, or to if there's going to be, we're going to be introduced to horrors, it will be one of those characters that gets picked off.
Yes.
In the usual way, or can we trust them? All these kind of tropes are coming out. So you've got this mixed message with Lord John is a great white hero because he's been out there and shot up the slavers. But that doesn't mean that he's going out there with a kind of just an imperialist attitude of I'm bringing civilization with the gun.
Yeah.
Is the basic message that we're getting there. So there's that attitude going on, and then with the leader of the party, the black character Sambo, dreadful name, obviously, and he's I think it's put in there sadly to make people chuckle. Unfortunately,
yes. No, I think that's right. Unfortunately, that's one of the really sad things about this novel, is that Zambo is definitely in there as a comedy character. He also betrays all those tropes of the noble savage, or the Rousseau noble savage. He's even at one point described as being faithful as a dog. And similarly, you get different racial characteristics applied to the characters described as half breeds. So they are fundamentally, as we will discover in this, untrustworthy, or at least one of them in particular is. And so, it's reinforcing a lot of racial stereotypes, as well as playing some of these characters for comedy, which is really unfortunate.
And it's a shame that Doyle does this with the name in particular, because we do have these sides to the character. He's to me, he brings to mind Jupiter in Poe's The Gold Bug.
Yes, absolutely.
He's a smart guy, but unfortunately, a lot of this is hidden behind the kind of the stereotyping and the perceived needs of comedy.
Yeah.
So you've got all that going on, and it's a different. I mean, we compared, and we'll do more of it in this episode. This novel to Rider Haggard's novels, because obviously Haggard was a great influence on the Lost World, and it's a different approach. I mean, Haggard's approach to the kind of the noble savage idea is more patronising. It does have but the characters aren't used for comedy. Your characters like Umbopa and Umschloppergas, they aren't there for comedic purpose, but it's still how the white man views.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's going on in this sort of novel. These are just the tropes of this kind of novel. And Conan Doyle is just going along with it, and it's something, if you're going to read these books, unfortunately, from that period. It's part of it.
Yeah, it is. So we're introduced to this party, and then we get a surprise additional guest. Summerlee is meant to be leading this party, and then guess who turns up? Challenger. I mean, it's a wonderful moment in the chapter where they open the letter that they've been given from Challenger, only to discover that the page inside is blank. If you actually think of this in terms of the investigation that is meant to be taking place, though, this is really problematic, because Challenger is now essentially taking control of an investigation into himself. So yet more of kind of George Edward Challenger's wonderful iconoclasm, and he also turns up dressed like he's out for a picnic, I think, rather than expedition, but never mind.
And there's also the odd side to this, where as you've pointed out, he shouldn't really be there.
No.
But also this kind of, you'd be lost without me.
Yes.
Yet we're also told, the word that's used by Malone about Roxton is he's a South America maniac.
Mm,
So Roxton knows South America very well and
mm.
would be a perfectly capable leader and would get them there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yet he gets sidelined straight away. Yet oddly enough, he doesn't seem to object to this.
No, that's true. And then before this chapter ends out, we get Malone relaying the events back to McArdle, and this is one of the features I think that is slightly hard for Conan Doyle to maintain in the novel, which is that essentially somehow this information has all got to get back, and he has to maintain the mystery of what will happen to them, while at the same time we know that this has been serialized so it gets I think in this as we'll cover in this episode, it gets increasingly hard to maintain that. There's all sorts of other things thrown in the mix to be able to make sure that these letters might or might not get back, or they could get back, but we still don't know the outcome of the adventure for the party. But yeah, it's a great moment with Challenger turning up, I think. Very good. And then we get to chapter 8, the outlying pickets of the world. And one of the features, I think, of this whole section, and you'd observed this to me before recording, Paul, that the traipsing through the jungle to get to the plateau takes an awful lot longer than I'd remembered.
Yeah, I was surprised at this. I enjoyed it actually because it's so well written, and it really does introduce us to this whole world, not just Lost World part of it, but the whole world of the Amazonian basin.
Yes,
as seen for this novel and this kind of jungle adventure side of it. So we're getting introduced to this very dangerous environment, and you've obviously got Challenger and Summerlee are there to do the scientific observations, and the others, Roxton in particular, there to look out for the actual dangers from the wildlife. And you also get, again, we were talking about tropes earlier. We have the tropes of the background jungle drums.
Oh yes,
to give this air of menace. As the brave white explorers go through this strange land,
yes.
So you've got that. It's drawn out, I think, to just increase the air of menace and danger.
That's right.
Before you even get to the destination.
Yeah, the bit about the drums is interesting in itself. That's the Malone reads into the drums, "We will kill you if we can. We will kill you if we can." But that's a classic bit of European paranoia that existed in all of these colonial possessions and territories. So yeah, that's a nice little touch. I mean, a couple of things really leapt out to me in this chapter. One of them is the fact that you get some wonderful exchanges between Summerlee and Challenger. The one I particularly liked was Challenger making a casual throwaway remark about the fact that he never cared to walk on the Thames embankment and look up the river, as it was always sad to see one's own eventual goal. And then it says, he is convinced, of course, that he is destined for Westminster Abbey. Summerlee rejoined, however, with a sour smile, by saying that he understood that Millbank Prison had been pulled down. But there's a lovely little throwaway insight in the discussion of these characters as well, about the nature of human beings, which I thought was particularly interesting when you think about Conan Doyle and his views on spiritualism and spirituality more broadly. He says here, they are children both, the one wizened and cantankerous, the other formidable and overbearing, yet each with a brain which has put him in the front rank of his scientific age. Brain, character, soul. Only as one sees more of life does one understand how distinct is each.
But you also get with that kind of life experience side. You also get the fact that Summerlee and Challenger are overgrown children.
Oh, completely.
And there's a wonderful phrase which caught my eye when I was reading, when Challenger appears and takes charge straight away. And so we have from Summerlee, "May I ask, sir," said Summerlee with vicious calm, "in what capacity you take it upon yourself to issue these orders?" So these bickering children.
Yeah, bickering children. And we're going to get some more of that later. I mean, they behave very childlike later as well. Yeah, and then you also get this wonderful stuff about them being scientific explorers too, about them being, and Conan Doyle, again, waxing lyrical about the romance of science. And I learned that day once and for all that both Summerlee and Challenger possessed that highest type of bravery, the bravery of the scientific mind. And here we get a kind of reference to Darwin and Wallace and previous expeditions, showing that Conan Doyle has done his homework on this.
And that's where you kind of, again, within the whole structure of this kind of book, you've got that way, you say, with the bravery of the scientist, but then you've got the other type of, which is the man with the gun.
Yeah.
Is there.
Oh, yes.
To protect them. The Roxton is there all the time, and he's the one who will go off. They will do their scientific writing and so on, and Roxton is the sort who will go off and write a 2-volume memoir of how exciting this all was, and what he's shot, and all this kind of thing. So you've got these contrasting worlds in this small party.
Yeah, I know which one I'd read. The other thing about it is that the description, there were two aspects of the description of this passage that struck me. One of them was the fact that, first of all, they use a lot of Eurocentric language around it. So it's described as being almost like a cathedral, this green cathedral in the as the upper branches of the trees sort of mesh together over the top of them. That was one thing. But the other one was this reference to fairyland. I did wonder if this might be another bit of a Dickie Doyle kind of reference, or feeding back to those ideas, because obviously he fairyland is closely associated with his work.
And also they're surrounded by foliage.
Yeah.
In which you've got certainly. I know it's a sort of English arboreal scene that you usually get with Dickie Doyle, but it's still that sort of thing where what could be living in the trees, and what sort of life might we encounter, and what possibilities are there in this strange world that we have entered.
Yeah, there was a lovely little note I found in the annotated Lost World that came out in the 90s, where somebody had spotted that later on the party are drinking bottled water of a variety called Apollinaris, which had a label that was designed by Dickie Doyle. So there you go. There's a piece of micro analysis for you. I like that one. And this chapter ends with this rather lovely, another of the letters home to McArdle, but this time you get this rather nice map that's taking us through the undergrowth. That is clearly, well, I assume this is in Conan Doyle's hand. It looks remarkably like it.
I presume it does look it, and it's again, we've got these nods with these maps straight away to King Solomon's Mines and Treasure Island.
Yeah.
We keep using the word trope, but we are in that world where this is genre literature of a certain type, and it's following a certain footprint, and in a knowing way. It's not just like this. This is the higher end of this sort of literature, and it's knowing, it's homage. There's a nod and a wink.
Yes,
going on.
It has the benefit of coming at the end of this kind of period of this kind of writing, and so it can nod back to things that have gone before, and also be slightly more playful with some of the concepts.
Yeah, and another side to the map element here as well. We're in a degree of a fantasy land. We are in, as I say, Treasure Island, or heading for King Solomon's Mines. But what's also interesting, we are in a definite part of the world as well.
Yeah.
When they arrive in South America, the party, it is pinpointed by Doyle as somewhere in that no man's land, which is formed by the half-defined frontiers between Peru, Brazil, and Colombia. So we've got real countries mentioned there, even though at one point he also calls South America itself a country.
Yes.
Which is a bit confusing, never mind wrong. But in this, we've got that air of reality.
Yeah.
There's also kind of, at this time and into the 20th century, there's almost a subgenre of South American novels by British writers who often make up their own countries.
Yeah.
And these stories are usually they're not adventure stories per se. They're often making a different point. about exploitation, or about how Europeans have behaved in South America. And I'm thinking along these lines with things like Joseph Conrad's Nostromo, which is published in 1904, and you got where he invents I think it's Costaguana is the country in that, and you've got John Masefield's Santa Barbara, which will appear in Sard Harker and Odtar in the mid-1920s. And there's Olifa in John Buchan's The Courts of the Morning, which was published in 1929. And that's essentially, there's almost an element of John Roxton wandering into that. I don't know if Buchan was deliberate, where Sandy Arbuthnot basically leads a war to take over the Republic of Olifa. So there's very much that tradition going on, and The Lost World fits into that in its own way. But as I said, it is noteworthy that Doyle places it in real countries with real names.
Yeah, it's a very specific location, isn't it? And in fact, at the beginning of this next chapter, chapter 9, who could have foreseen it? Like, the chapter titles are wonderful. There is a reference to the plateau and this detached pinnacle that sits to one side of it, and that is actually a genuine geological feature, Mount Roraima. And the explorer G.H.H. Tate climbed it in 1930, and in his memoir described it as the towering pinnacle of Conan Doyle's Lost World fame. So there you go. So it's a genuine place. That's where Conan Doyle also refers to this plateau as being characteristic of basaltic upheavals. Something of the sort is to be seen in Salisbury Crags at Edinburgh. So he's drawing straight away from the kind of horizon and landscape of his home.
I mean, as we pointed out in the last episode, Edinburgh is in his mind when he's writing this. When we've had the brouhaha at the meeting in London.
Yes,
very reminiscent of the sort of things that went on with Edinburgh University medical students in particular. So it's there's a lot of things going on in Doyle's mind while he's writing this.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you mentioned, the march to the plateau is about setting up this kind of sense of unease as well. The thing that really, I think, stands out for chapter 9 is that everything gets very sinister and very horrific pretty quickly now. At this point, we start to get... And it's one of the features, I think, of Conan Doyle's writing, even this being, accepted as a boy's own adventure. It is pretty grim at places.
It's again fitting into that tradition which I'm constantly referencing here is these books which are the boys' own adventures and often sidelined into kind of the schoolroom or even the nursery almost. That you read them. And I don't think you notice this when you read them when you're younger, but as you get older, you do notice more and more how violent these books are. And this is definitely in that. And same with Treasure Island.
Oh, Treasure Island, massively.
There's a real dark undercurrent
going
on in these stories. And you can enjoy the surface side, but as you read them more and more, the undercurrent becomes more and more evident. And again, the same with, we mentioned King Solomon's Mines, but it's kind of more expected with that.
Yes.
But with Treasure Island and The Lost World being more adventure stories of I hesitate, they're not a gentler type, but they don't involve major wars and so on.
No.
And you do get they make you sit up at times. What did I?
Yeah, that's right. They do. And in fact, in this one, I mean, the first thing that they encounter is this incredibly large snake, which fortunately doesn't do anything for them at this point in time anyway. So that reminded me a bit of The Fiend of the Cooperage, this short story that Conan Doyle had written in 1997. And
but mustn't give too much of that away because we'll be covering that in a future episode.
Yeah, we will do that. Yeah, we'll definitely do that one as well. But the bit that really struck me was the stuff about finding people who had been thrown off the plateau. This is the first sense that we get that actually there are inhabitants or there are people at the top of the plateau because they found people at the bottom of the plateau who've been speared on bamboo. And I think later we discover that the bamboo's been growing through their bodies.
This is we get almost a double purpose here because this is the first time I think where we actually understand that Maple White had a companion with him.
Yes, that's right.
Whereas before this, we assumed that Maple White has made his own way, and then they found this skeleton, which is clearly from the objects they find with the skeleton, another American.
Yeah.
And the other thing, again, I think we're back to Treasure Island a bit here, with the skeleton almost pointing the way.
Oh, this is when we find the Maple White's camp. Yeah.
Where like the skeleton in Treasure Island that's been deliberately planted as a waymarker.
Yeah. It reminded me a bit of, is it the Goldbug? It's the Goldbug, isn't it?
Yes, where there's the skull up the tree. So again, we're referencing two of Conan Doyle's favourites here.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it's at this time as well that they've reached the base of the plateau at this point, but they can't find a way up. And you get this, you get quite an Indiana Jones type sequence here, don't you? This, traipsing around, trying to find the way through. They find a passage they can't get up it. It's been closed off. You've got the skull and the marker. It's all rather wonderful. The thing that I find very peculiar about this plateau, though, is how big is it? It seems to change depending on the chapters. And so when they arrive at the bottom of the plateau, Challenger says, "Oh, well, I went right. And I went for a few days and I couldn't find anything." So they go left. That's when they find Maple White's camp. And then later, I think we discovered that they takes them 6 days to go all the way around the base of the plateau. Later, it's described as being the size of a small English county. So, I have no idea how big this damn thing is. So,
I mean, what they could have done with is probably some Buddhist prayer beads to count, like the pundits in doing surreptitious mapping in Central Asia.
Well, that's right. That's right. So you have no idea. I mean, the biologists will be asking questions about the biodiversity possible to sustain life on the top of the plateau, but that plateau seems to change size all sorts of different times. And now they have to work out how they're going to get to the top of the plateau. I mean, just they actually see this pinnacle that I mentioned before. There's the tree on the top. They briefly see a creature which Challenger insists is a pterodactyl, and Summerlee thinks is a stork. So, but Roxton, I think, casually takes Malone to one side and says, "I've never seen anything like that before." So that's a good sign they're on the right track as well.
Yes, they have their first exciting encounter with prehistoric life at the base when they've been they're cooking their meal, and suddenly something swoops out of the night. And steals the meal, and they know that isn't a stork, and that it comes close enough to them for them to know, and that they have now seen a pterodactyl, and it's one of the psychological high points of the novel in terms of Summerlee has to turn to Challenger.
He does,
and say, "You were right." That is quite definitely a pterodactyl. So we know now that's it. The die is set.
Yes,
we've got to get up to that plateau and see what else there is. And no doubt Lord John is itching, because he didn't get a chance to shoot this one.
No, that's right.
No doubt he's itching to.
His trigger finger is. That's right. Yeah, and then so now they know what the prize is. Then they're doubly frustrated to try and get up there, and this is where you get this wonderful sequence of the sort of picture of the depressed team at the base of the plateau, and this great line. I remember that as I dropped off to sleep, my last recollection was that Challenger was squatting like a monstrous bullfrog by the fire, his huge head in his hands, sunk apparently in the deepest thought and entirely oblivious to the good night which I wished him. But then he's sort of Challenger is victorious. He's discovered he reckons a way to get up, which is that we discover at this point that this monstrous bullfrog of a man is capable of mountain climbing, which is an interesting detail. But he's come up with his plan. I did like this little reference again. His destiny. His beard bristled exultantly, his chest was thrown out, and his hand was thrust into the front of his jacket. So, in his fancy, may he see himself sometimes, gracing the vacant pedestal in Trafalgar Square, and adding one more to the horrors of the London streets. If I was of more artistic bent and I could sculpt, I might pitch a Challenger sculpture for the 4th plinth, since it's now home to touring art exhibitions. Anyway, they manage with Challengers.
Inspiration.
Inspiration and hitherto unforeshadowed mountaineering skills.
Yes.
To get to the top of the pinnacle. Fell a beech tree. I thought it was interesting. It's a beech tree, isn't it? Somebody describes it as a fellow countryman in a far land. They fell a European tree to get into the Lost World. Go, take that for your imagery, and then make it across. But it is not without incident, because suddenly the tree comes crashing down behind them, and you get this realization that actually one of their compatriots or helpers has an ulterior motive for accompanying Roxton into the heart of the Lost World.
Yeah, this is where it turns all a bit Raiders of the Lost Ark. In the opening South American sequence of that film, with the sudden turning of their South American helpers, and it turns out it's Gomez who then turns out to be the brother of the leader of the slavers whom John Roxton has executed in his earlier adventures. And he's been waiting for his moment. So they haven't done a very good vetting procedure on their team.
No, that's true.
That's all. But yeah, it all turns very melodramatic. The usual "I will get you out," the waving of the triumphant fist of Gomez as you are marooned forever, and then as he climbs down, we get another character moment because Roxton doesn't shout back at him. He simply moves along a bit, gets his rifle, and shoots him while he's quite halfway down the pinnacle.
Right.
There's a scream and a thud.
It is exactly like that bit in Raiders of the Lost Ark, isn't it? Yeah, it's a great moment, actually. It's a very good moment. But now that we have our party trapped, marooned on the plateau, and no idea how on earth to get back, but also waiting for the wonderful things that are in store.
And again, it's been very cleverly set up.
Yeah.
Again, we get this. Doyle knows what he's doing. Where earlier we've been shown the blocked route by which they'd hoped to make their ascent.
Yeah.
So we've been warned, right? Once they're marooned up there, we know that route's closed off. So it's very well planned out.
Yeah, it is. It is. That's right. So we're now into chapter 10. The most wonderful things have happened. And my notes for this chapter conveniently just read dinosaurs, exclamation mark. Because we've got to the best bit now. We've got to all the stuff with the dinosaurs. So, just before we get there, I was struck again by some of the use of this sort of Eurocentric language. So they've just crossed into onto the plateau, and they sit there planning their next move, eating cocoa and biscuits, which is the essential food for British explorers, I think. And says, there we sat in cleanly comfort while we made our first plans for the invasion of this new country. And of course, what do they set up? They set up a base which they call Fort Challenger. But it's amazing that the automatic assumption is that everything is going to be things to be conquered. It's going to be harsh, and it's going to be horrible, and it's they have to dominate and control, etc. So there might not be any kind of British flags planted in the soil or anything like that, but definitely the language is the language of possession and control.
Well, you say that about the flags, but with Fort Challenger, essentially, this is how empires start. This is with the East India Company when they really started on their program of almost half accidental conquest. But you set up a trading post and you set up a fort.
Yeah, that's right. And then from that fort, they're able to start spreading out, and this is where they encounter dinosaurs for the first time. And it's a wonderful moment, isn't it? You were talking earlier about the fact that the professors are both men and boys. and that absolutely brilliant description of them citing the iguanodons, I think. The two professors were in silent ecstasy. In their excitement, they had unconsciously seized each other by the hand and stood like two little children in the presence of a marvel. Challenger's cheeks bunched up into a seraphic smile, and Summerlee's sardonic face softening for the moment into wonder and reverence. They spotted these little tracks as well, didn't they, beforehand, which is takes us right back to the origins of the Lost World, and one of the reasons why Conan Doyle wrote it in the first place, which is this reference to the Wealden clay. So dinosaur fossils had been discovered on, quite literally on Conan Doyle's doorstep. And so this was one of the reasons why he got so interested in it. And there's a little reference to his local knowledge here as well, isn't there? In that he says, Lord John is looking at the tracks on the ground and thinks it's a large bird. And Challenger insists that, no, this is a creature walking erect upon three-toed feet, and occasionally putting one of its five-fingered forepaws upon the ground. Not a bird, my dear Roxton, not a bird. A beast? No, a reptile, a dinosaur. Nothing else could have left such a track. They puzzled a worthy Sussex doctor some 90 years ago. And that's this reference to Dr. Gideon Mantell, who wrote a description of an iguanodon skeleton in the 1820s. He hadn't actually discovered the skeleton. It was his sister. and she discovered it down a Sussex country lane, of all things. But this is important because T.H. Huxley, who was one of the great proponents of Darwin and followed and extended Darwin's theories, he read the description and believed that the iguanodon was capable of hopping like a kangaroo. But it's worth probably pausing at this point just to mention about another thing that is contemporaneous with the Lost World and relates to dinosaurs, which is the business of the Piltdown Man. Because this is something that came about after the Lost World was being serialized, but it's something that has kind of I don't know, cast a shadow over Conan Doyle for many, many years now. And that's that when the Lost World was finishing serialization in December 1912, the Piltdown Man discovery was made very close to Conan Doyle's house. And this was the discovery of the two parts of an early human, a skull and a jaw, which was supposed to be from the same creatures. It was 8 miles from Windlesham. The discovery was made by Charles Dawson, who was a local lawyer and a geologist, but he was supported in the early work of uncovering this by Arthur Smith Woodward, who was the keeper of the Department of Geology at the British Museum as well. And Conan Doyle knew Dawson, and he actually knew Dawson as early as November 1911, so before this was serialized, as this was being written. And the discovery was a sensation because it suggested that primitive man had developed an advanced brain and, more importantly, on English soil.
Yes.
Because, of course, the earlier discoveries had been made in France and Germany and Southeast Asia as well. But then in the 50s, it became apparent that the artifacts were forgeries. And this became a really celebrated case. And for decades, people have been wondering about exactly what was going on. But essentially, the fossils had been artificially stained to give the sense of age. They did fluoride testing and discovered that it was from a different period and different place. And obviously, the principal suspects in this case, were Dawson and Woodward. Then in 1983, a book came out by John Hathaway Winslow and Alfred Meyer that suggested Conan Doyle had committed the fraud. And suggested that it was a fraud perpetrated against scientists because of their criticisms of his spiritualist beliefs. Now, that's 1912 is a bit early for that kind of approach, but they started to throw in all sorts of different facts. And of course, the kind of smoking gun that they found in the Lost World was a conversation between Ed Malone and Tarp Henry, which we kind of briefly skirted over in the first episode, where Tarp Henry says, if you are clever and know your business, you can fake a bone as easily as you can a photograph. So Conan Doyle came in for quite a bit of heat at this point. Jean Conan Doyle, his surviving daughter, and Peter Costello, who'd written on Conan Doyle and Crime, were quite quick to dismantle this. But it was really Doug Elliott who wrote a pamphlet for the bookmakers of Toronto in 1988, who did a complete demolition job of this argument. And actually, there's been some really, if you look at the sort of the work in the last 10 years, the best work has been done by Professor John McNabb, who is the head of archaeology at Southampton University and is a member of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And John McNabb has done a fair few articles about this, really showing how clever this forgery was, but also making the point that, this was a joke that seemed to have got out of hand.
Yeah.
And he is, careful enough not to pin the blame on anybody. But, reading between the lines, I would put my money on Dawson over anybody else, not least because he died at the point at which these discoveries stopped being made.
I mean, it's interesting to note with the kind of the joke out of hand that even though, Doyle will not have been involved in anything to do with the forgery at all. It's just, it's a non-starter. It really just doesn't hold water. But it's interesting that he gets tied up. I mean, this wasn't contemporaneous, but he gets tied up in this forgery, possible joke out of hand, and which is essentially, of course, what Cottingley was with the fairies.
Yeah, indeed.
Just a joke or a fun thing that got out of hand. And once the press get hold, they then take on their own momentum.
Yeah. That's right,
and it becomes more and more difficult to back out of these things, and both in their ways had their own serious consequences, as well as having this kind of humorous side. But
that's right.
I think at this point of time, it's difficult to realise how big a thing Piltdown was.
Yeah,
as well. That this wasn't just a minor thing. This was a major incident, and what they thought was obviously seemed like a major discovery. And when the forgery was revealed in 1953, there's there's a big cultural uproar with this, and as one of the early books on this by J.S. Wiener makes out, that there'd been a couple of generations had already been brought up almost with the belief that the missing link had been found, and was a proven thing. And you get kind of a curious cultural reflection of this in 1956 with Angus Wilson's novel Anglo-Saxon Attitudes, in which he essentially mashes up Piltdown Man and Sutton Hoo.
Yeah, he does.
And it has a wonderful time poking fun at academia while he's doing it. So there is a real cultural effect of all these incidents.
Good point. So we've now encountered iguanodons, and you get all this wonderful description of observing this stuff. I think Lord John's natural first reaction is to want to shoot one, I think.
Yes.
And take this, as we've now come to realise.
I think that Malone notices his trigger finger itching. Slipping cartridges into the gun.
That's right, yeah. But
God
then,
knows how he's going to kind of cut it up and mount it.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Well, I suppose that's what the native peoples are for. They're going to have to carry that back. But you, aside from the iguanodons, you then get to the swamp of the pterodactyls.
Oh yes, I mean this is where we get with the iguanodons. We've got this kind of the gentle dinosaurs, who are just the vegetarians who oh ye of little brain, as they're sort of depicted, and then you get the pterodactyls, and they're depicted as this is prehistoric monsters.
Yes,
this is proper kind of Hollywood stuff.
Yeah.
They find what this depression where all the pterodactyls live, which is termed the pterodactyl swamp, and you get this description of the place into which we gazed was a pit. It was bowl-shaped, and at the bottom were pools of green, scummed, stagnant water, fringed with bulrushes. It was a weird place in itself, but its occupants made it seem like a scene from the Seven Circles of Dante. The place was a rookery of pterodactyls. There were hundreds of them congregated within view. All the bottom area round the water edge was alive with their young ones and with hideous mothers brooding upon their leathery yellowish eggs. From this crawling, flapping mass of obscene reptilian life came the shocking clamour which filled the air and the mephitic musty odour which turned us sick. Large and small, not less than 1,000 of these filthy creatures lay in the hollow before us. I mean, this is real nightmare stuff, and it's actually, where I was saying Doyle sets things up with showing us that the entrance stroke exit of the Lost World has been blocked.
Yeah.
So, and he's almost set this one up before as well, because on the original journey, they walked through another area of swampland. And this time it's not the pterodactyls, it's snakes, and this is, to make matters worse, the place seemed to be a favourite breeding place of the Jaracaca snake, the most venomous and aggressive in South America. Again and again, these horrible creatures came writhing and springing towards us across the surface of this putrid bog, and it was only by keeping our shotguns forever ready that we could feel safe from them. One funnel-shaped depression in the morass of a livid green in colour from some lichen which festered in it will always remain as a nightmare memory in my mind. It seems to have been a special nest of these vermin, and the slopes were alive with them, all writhing in our direction. For it is a peculiarity of the Jaracaca that it will always attack men at first sight.
Yeah.
So we've got these kind of, it's vivid writing, and there's something obviously that Doyle gets very excited by these sort of locations, and his we've got his love of bogs and morasses comes out a lot in his fiction. You've got one in Micah Clarke, you've got the bog of Cree in The Mystery of Cloomber, and of course you've got the Great Grimpen Mire in The Hound of the Baskervilles. So he's really into these sort of locations, but it's noteworthy to see how he's set this up. We've got two of these, and we've got the snake one, which seems awful, and then we've got the real bad one.
Yeah, we've got the really horrible one.
And it struck me personally as well. This mephitic, musty odour that you get around it. A couple of years ago, I went to Bempton Cliffs on the east coast of Yorkshire, and that's all these gannets and puffins, and the smell. As well as the noise of all these. It's wonderful to see, but the smell hits you.
Yeah.
So I presume Doyle's probably seen something like that, and it really, because the writing is so vivid.
It is very vivid.
And realistic. You think that he's again bringing in experience.
Yeah. It's interesting. The thing about the snakes in the first swamp is very reminiscent of a description of a similar incident in Percy Fawcett's writings as well, who we mentioned in the first episode. The other thing is that you mentioned there in the description the 7 circles of Dante, because this is I think the second or third reference we've had to Dante in the Lost World as well. So he's very keen to, they're going to this incredible place, but there's this horrible darker side to it as well, and this sense that they're now trapped in this place, and it's going to get worse and worse. And the mephitic odor is very much a kind of demonic, circles of hell.
And with the start of the Inferno, it starts with Dante being lost in a forest, and Virgil becomes his guide.
Yeah, and the pterodactyls as harpies and things like that. Yeah, and then you get a very modern reference in the description of the pterodactyls. Then the flight grew lower and the circle narrower until they were whizzing round and round us, the dry rustling flap of their huge slate-coloured wings filling the air with a volume of sound that made me think of Hendon Aerodrome upon a race day. I mean, that's a very contemporary reference. They'd only had races for about 2 years at that point, but obviously he'd taken part, he'd attended, and I think at this point he'd been up in a plane as well.
Yeah, he flew from Hendon in May 1911.
Yeah. So there you go. So that's exactly
again personal experience coming in.
Yeah. And you get this casual mention at the end of this chapter about the blue clay, which is a big setup, but we're not going to go to there, and that's going to be in episode 3. And then we're on to chapter 11. For once, I was the hero, and this is where, having encountered a bit of the Lost World, they're all very concerned about how to press on with the expedition, where to go next, and Malone volunteers to shin up a tree, basically 100 feet up a tree, and do a drawing, and it's up there that he encounters for the first time the ape men. The description of the ape men is interesting in that you instantly get this almost visceral reaction to them, this horror, at the presence. And of course, at this point, it's only Malone who has experienced it. But as we go on in the rest of this, the chapters we're covering in this episode, it becomes even more apparent that there's almost like a kind of race memory hatred of the ape men that clicks in at various different times.
Yes, it's kind of like the description of Mr. Hyde.
Yes,
where everyone who sees Mr. Hyde has this instinctive.
That's right.
They can't put their finger on it, but they know there's something very wrong.
Yeah,
and something that just is this creature, this man, whatever, is some sort of enemy of mankind.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, it is. It's like reaction to almost like sensing a complete evil without anything to balance it. But you also, as ever with this novel, you get wonderful comedy moments. The one that really made me laugh was somebody saying, "Okay, right, we've discovered dinosaurs here. Now we have to think about how the hell we're going to get home." And this wonderful exchange between them, which reveals the nature of their academic credentials. You must remember, said Summerlee sourly, that I have a large class in London who are at present at the mercy of an extremely inefficient locum tenens. This makes my situation different from yours, Professor Challenger, since, so far as I know, you have never been entrusted with any responsible educational work. Quite so, said Challenger. I have felt it to be a sacrilege to divert a brain which is capable of the highest original research to any lesser object. That is why I have sternly set my face against any proffered scholastic appointment. And this is, I work in higher education. This is the bias between research and teaching. And it still exists to this day. It's astonishing. But this whole idea that Summerlee is on a teaching contract and Challenger's on a research contract. But actually, Douglas Kerr has a really good point about this in his book on Conan Doyle's writing. He makes the point that, what are Challenger's professional credentials? He is a professor, but he doesn't have an academic appointment.
Yes, so he's obviously, he's held a chair.
He's held a chair. That's right. But what is he? And is this professorship? Is it current? is it an honorific? Is it something he's taking himself? I mean,
it brings us back to the other professor.
Oh,
the one who has lost his chair.
Yes, indeed.
Moriarty, who still uses the name professor, even though he really shouldn't, as Holmes makes the point. Yeah. So again, is there a little, because there seem to me to be little references going on. We have that with Challenger, and we have a kind of another member of this expedition who describes himself as a shikari, who could be somewhere along the line another version of Moran. So
and in fact there is a little sting in the tail to this, which I'm sure was not appreciated by Conan Doyle at the time, which is that at the end Summerlee gets a choice as to what to do with newfound wealth. And the thing that he would really like to do is to give up teaching and focus on his research. That 'twas ever thus. So we have this ape-man encounter and this almost visceral reaction to it as well. There's another strange negative commentary about the Irish, coming from an author of strong Irish heritage, maybe distancing himself from his Irish past, I don't know. But, this idea that Malone could only have seen this because of his Irish inheritance, they only encountered this ape man. Our young friend certainly said something of the kind. He is also the one among us who is endowed with that Celtic temperament, which would make him sensitive to such impressions. Summerlee says, the whole theory of telepathy, began Summerlee, filling his pipe, is too vast to be now discussed, said Challenger with decision. But yes, you've got yet again this little, and we had that in the first part as well, didn't we?
And it's good at that point as well to recognise that Doyle is not tempted to go off into a discussion of telepathy and slow down the action.
No, if it had been Verne. So now we have this additional challenge that they have to think not only about investigating the lost world, but also how to get back again to what Challenger refers to as the flesh pots of civilization, and Summerlee corrects as the ink pots of civilization, because pointing out that they have to get this damn stuff published. And then we're into chapter 12. It was dreadful in the forest. And this is where everything starts to go a bit south for the expedition.
Just before we enter onto that, it's I don't know if you felt this, Mark, and when you look at the map that has now been drawn, that Malone's drawn from, and where it's published in the book, it's full of spoilers.
Oh, is
if you
it?
Look at the names. It's got loads of names in for stuff that hasn't happened yet and things that we don't know.
Oh my goodness! Yes, you're right. I'm looking at it now.
But they have to put it in the book, but they're kind of hoping, I presume, that people won't go too closely with what's about.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So you also, maybe he does have telepathy if he's able to. He's got the power of prediction if he's drawn this map with what's going to happen next. Okay. They could have saved themselves a lot of trouble. Yes. So chapter 12, it was dreadful in the forest, and this is where things are all starting to go badly.
Yeah, so we now get into what will later become it's again classic Hollywood territory for dinosaur movies. But Conan Doyle is leading the way in this, and we get an overconfident Malone because because he has been the hero of the hour. Decides in the night that he'll go for a walk.
Yes.
Through the Lost World on his own. He's got a gun with him, so he's fine, or so he thinks. So he kind of has a few incidents, but gets through to the lake okay, and sees various other creatures. He sees this watering hole, dinosaur watering hole in action. But it's on his way back. He has a sense of being followed. Earlier on, there has been a tragedy at the Iguanodon enclosure, as it were, and right. one of them has encountered another dinosaur, which was very hungry and isn't vegetarian.
Yes.
So this is now begins to prey on Malone's mind as he's wandering through the forest on his own with something padding behind him.
Yeah.
Right. And this becomes. This is classic stuff. It's very well written, very wonderful tension.
Yeah.
It does turn out to be we relate to it's an Allosaurus, which is in the same like a T-Rex.
T-Rex, yeah, that's right.
A big hungry meat eater. So we get the classic chase scene, and that kind of the thing that's at the centre of so many dinosaur fictions and movies is this the fear of being eaten. And there's something in the food chain above mankind.
That's right.
Which is always a very scary thought.
Yeah.
But he as he's getting chased through the forest, he suddenly feels the ground open up beneath him, and we're on to another phase of what else the creature doesn't understand what's happened because it is again of little brain, and can't use its scent so much, so it kind of. Well, where's he gone? I don't know. I'll go and find something else.
That's right.
So the moment is, but again, it's this very careful plotting that Doyle's done. Is the reason that the ground has given way is leading on to the next plot point.
Yeah, that's right. So this is where we discover essentially this trap that this is a man-made trap that Malone has fallen into, and it's a good example of Conan Doyle's the concision of his writing, that you get a really great action sequence resolved, which takes you straight into this next piece. It's very actually, I'm sure we'll come on to this in the next episode. It's a very Spielberg thing where you combine several pieces of action into one shot, and this is he discovers that in this narrow-mouthed cave. That there's been a trap has been laid for the Allosaurus. There's a line here: "Man was always the master." Yet again, all this stuff about superiority. And he eventually returns to the camp, to presumably a bit more bedraggled and smelling a lot worse. But the camp is in disarray, and there is nobody left.
He'd heard a shot on his way back, saying a single shot. but he thought this might be someone welcoming him. Perhaps he wasn't over worried. I mean, this bit again with the constant references to other works or subtle references. I was put in mind straight away as he returns to the camp and it's empty of again Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island.
Yeah, that's right.
After Jim has beached the Hispaniola and returns to what he thinks is the safety of the stockade.
Yeah,
it's all very quiet, and he goes in, and it's full of sleeping pirates.
Yes,
and his friends have disappeared. Yeah. So it's again the same sort of
same thing,
shock moment.
Yeah, yeah. So chapter 13, a sight which I shall never forget. Malone is actually roused in the middle of the night by Lord John, who has returned, but with horrible news of what he has seen, which is the ape men.
Yeah, we've had this prefigured as well, and this all ties into what we were discussing about Peltdown Man, interestingly as well. But after Malone has had his first encounter in the tree with the first ape man, and mentions this to his companions, we get this. The question which we have to face is whether he approaches more closely to the ape or the man. In the latter case, he may well approximate to what the vulgar have called the missing link. We then get, as we say, Mark, with Roxton shaking Malone awake. He has encountered these ape men, and his response is, ape men, that's what they are, missing links. And I wish they'd stayed missing.
It's true. It's wonderful. And the sort of ultimate payoff in this, the great great joke in this is that, of course, Challenger looks exactly like one of them. And this is I think one of the, again, this is where the novel it works at a completely simple Boy's Own Adventure level, and then also you're getting some clever hints in here, aren't you? Conan Doyle is asking this question, what really does separate us from the apes? And in Challenger's case, very little, it would appear, physically.
It's a mixture of comedy, and again, to us reading it now, it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, we have first Roxton describes the ape man chief as a sort of red challenger.
Yes,
because they're described as red-haired, which is again very very telling in Doyle's world, because red hair features a lot in Doyle's stories, and it is often a sign of danger.
Yes.
Even though Roxton himself is red-haired, it's danger in a different way from him.
Yeah, that's true.
But it can often mean threatening danger to the characters, and that's what obviously the ape men represent. But then as Malone looks at the chief, he says, in all things he was, as Lord John had said, the very image of our professor, save that his colouring was red instead of black, the same short, broad figure, the same heavy shoulders, the same forward hang of the arms, the same bristling beard merging itself into the hairy chest. And then we get this. Only above the eyebrows, where the sloping forehead and low-curved skull of the ape man were in sharp contrast to the broad brow and magnificent cranium of the European, could one see any marked difference? And I'd say note those two words, magnificent and European.
Yeah.
It's not even human, it's European.
European, that's right.
So suddenly we're into this kind of superiority language.
Yes, which is going to carry us all the way through to the end of the novel now. And yes, there's significantly more frontal development in the case of
Absolutely. We're back there again, yes.
and the other place that we're back to again is this fear of degeneration, because that's in a way what the ape men represent. They're not only are they the missing link, but and there is this sort of visceral reaction to them. I think they also represent this idea of, if evolution can go forwards, can it go backwards? And we've talked about this idea of degeneration before. It's maybe a little late 1912 for this still to be a preoccupation, but I was struck by the fact that when Challenger is seen having been captured by the ape men, Malone says, a single day seemed to have changed him from the highest product of modern civilization to the most desperate savage in South America. This idea that actually being around them is almost a polluting influence. And in fact, Roxton says, the filthy beast fingered me all over, and I feel as if I should never be clean again, which is a classic kind of trope of Imperial Gothic, but also, the sort of body horror. You touch something, it's polluting influence. It's something that you get in M.R. James stories, and his horrors are always, touch phobias and things like that.
But we're also introduced at this stage to the fact that the 8 men aren't the only inhabitants.
That's right.
Of the plateau who aren't dinosaurs or,
yes,
or wildlife, and there seems to be a tribe of Amazonian Indians up here who are, from what they take in, the sworn enemies.
Yes,
of the 8 men now, and we have Challenger's view on these people. Is very different. The type of these people, said he in his sonorous fashion, whether judged by cranial capacity, facial angle, or any other test, cannot be regarded as a low one. On the contrary, we must place it as considerably higher in the scale than many South African tribes, which I can mention. So we're getting set up with this contrast of it's quite clear there with Challenger that he regards them as beneath Europeans.
Yes,
certainly above the 8 men.
Yes, yeah. So, you're getting that whole stratification of different types, and of course the thing that really singles out the native peoples as being worthy of the European support is that ultimately they're compliant. Roxton even describes them as plucky little chaps, I think, at one point as well. At this point, the race superiority stuff is coming in very strong. And in terms of the missing links themselves, the 8 men, they represent their control or domination over the natives who have managed. I think we later discovered that they have found their way up to the plateau, and this is how they exist on the plateau. But ultimately they've enslaved, and they're being controlled by the 8 men. And so this is a subversion of that natural order. And this is something that ultimately the Europeans cannot allow, which is what frames us up for the rest of this.
We're into the world here of Wells's time machine in some ways as well, with the Eloi and the Morlocks. And the Morlocks, they kind of rule by brutal savagery, and we get this with the 8 men, with they capture the Indians, and we find out now why the skeleton at the bottom is there with it impaled, because this is how the 8 men get their fun.
Yes,
by capturing the Indians and hurling them off. To be speared on the bamboo, and this Roxton has a very typical way of when he's witnessed this. And he says, 4 of the Indians jumped, and the canes went through them like knitting needles through a pat of butter. Oh. No wonder we found that poor Yankee skeleton with the canes growing between his ribs. It was horrible, but it was doosedly interesting too.
God.
So that's a very sort of revealing Roxton moment. I feel that you can't help but be fascinated by what he's, even though he would, he's in the queue to be next off. And again, I don't know, because the way he talks about it, I don't know if this is another sort of pirate literature reference. This is essentially walking the plank.
Oh, it is, yeah.
And just put in a different context. So again, another one of these lovely little sly asides looking at other areas of this sort of genre literature. But it's a wonderful moment.
Yeah, it is a great moment, and of course the imminent threat is that Summerlee is the next one to be thrown off. So you now get into this wonderful piece about where Roxton is planning, with Malone's help, the assault to finally finish off the 8 men and release the professors and the native peoples from the 8 men's control. And then you get this really significant line that you've looked into a fair bit, Paul, which is this one. The last stand of the Greys won't be in it, which is a reference to Rider Haggard.
Yes, it's a direct reference. So yes, you got Roxton go, by George, they'll have something to excite them if they put us up. The last stand of the Greys won't be in it. with their rifles grasped in their stiffened hands, mid a ring of the dead and dying, as some fathead sings.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of, and you know who the fathead is, don't you, Mark?
Yeah, well, the fathead, the ring of the dead and dying is actually a line from Conan Doyle's poem Corporal Dick's Promotion. So he's actually poking fun at himself here. But the last stand of the Greys is the title of chapter 14 of King Solomon's Mines.
Yeah, and this is one of the it's the big battle scene in King Solomon's Mines, where you've got the two factions of the Kukwana tribe. There's a pretender king and the real king, and they've split. And of course, the European adventurers, as always, are with the real king, and they're going to help him to win his throne back. But Alan Quatermain is the narrator, and he's considerably more romantic in his view than Lord John Roxton.
Yeah.
He says, "As for the fight that followed, who can describe it? Again and again the multitudes surged against our momentarily lessening circle, and again we beat them back. The stubborn spearmen still made good the dark impenetrable wood, each stepping where his comrade stood the instant that he fell, as someone or other beautifully says." So this is classic. This sort of heroic poetry is he is seen as wonderful and beautiful. With Conan Doyle, you've got two things going on. You've got him sort of spoofing this Rider Haggard approach, and then, as you say, spoofing himself. But you know that he also loves this stuff.
He loves it.
But because in the Lost World, it's fitting that you've got this spoofing, you've got this kind of iconoclastic view coming from Lord John Roxton, who is a more cynical character. It all makes sense there. And it's very modern as well, what Doyle is doing here with this kind of metatextual approach, where he's not referencing history, he's referencing another novel.
Yeah, that's right.
With this, but they're both he and Haggard are tying into this kind of the great tradition of the Last Stand, which will become a big thing in imperial iconography. I mean, you've got before the Great Imperial Victorian Age, you've got the idea of the dead lying in their squares at Waterloo.
Yes,
there's that element is coming in there, but then you've later got into kind of the 1879 the Battle of St. Luana in the Zulu War, or the Battle of Abu Klea in the Gordon Relief Expedition, or the Shangani Patrol of 1893, which was one of the great epics of the First Matabele War. All of this is very strongly in the culture, and it's looked at in different ways as well. With the Shangani Patrol, for instance, there's a very little known story, but a semi-supernatural story based on the Shangani Patrol by P.C. Wren called In a Glass Clearly, which is really taking these sort of ideas in another different direction. But they're so embedded in culture. Everyone who's reading The Lost World and getting this will understand what's being referenced. And they'll have a little chuckle at the Roxton's fathead comment. Because it is kind of you've suddenly got it almost going into bathos.
Yes, it's mirroring. That's right. I mean, the bit that they might not pick up on directly is, I think, slightly insidious at this point, which is that in some ways The Lost World is a almost like a manual for how to be a man, I suppose, directed towards boys. And so you get a kind of eulogizing of certain types of behavior. You get this around this time with Malone's description of Roxton. His love of danger, his intense appreciation of the drama of an adventure, all the more intense for being held tightly in. His consistent view that every peril in life is a form of sport, a fierce game betwixt you and fate, with death as a forfeit, made him a wonderful companion at such hours. If it were not for our fears as to our fate of our companions, it would have been a positive joy to throw myself with such a man into such an affair. Right. So he's setting up Roxton as being, Roxton is this great figure who he would follow anywhere, frankly. And then you get this thing about the actual attack on the 8 men, which becomes very dark very quickly. Malone says, "There are strange red depths in the soul of the most commonplace man. I am tender-hearted by nature. and have found my eyes moist many a time over the scream of a wounded hare. Yet the bloodlust was on me now. I found myself on my feet, emptying one magazine, then the other, clicking open the breech to reload, snapping it to again, while cheering and yelling with pure ferocity and joy of slaughter as I did so. And that's I was taken aback when I read that. I had completely forgotten this homo, but the red mist is on Malone, and he is behaving the way that a good English soldier should do when at the front, in the sense that your care for yourself should go, and you should be focused primarily on the on the defense or the attack. It's quite a chilling moment, I think, that.
But it's also, I mean, again, number of points. He also notes this later with Challenger. He says Challenger's eyes were shining with the lust of slaughter.
Yeah.
So the same thing comes to Challenger. But it's also, with the contrast with Roxton, it's also a bad soldierly attribute as well, because he's not in control.
Yes.
The good soldier should be disciplined and in control and should be able to stop the red mist.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And that's the difference between him and Roxton.
Yeah.
Roxton's done this, but Roxton is a professional killer.
Yeah. Yes, he is.
He doesn't take joy from it. It's just what he does.
Yeah.
He doesn't think about it too much. He knows he's damn good at it.
Yeah.
It's what he does.
Yeah.
And he will be, if this was on a film, you'd get this contrast. And Roxton will be stood there dead calm.
Yeah.
Just shooting.
Yeah.
And you've then got Malone, the amateur, losing control.
Yes.
In the middle of this all. And also almost bringing himself down to the level of the ape men.
Well, this is the degeneration theme again, isn't it? And it's interesting you make that point about Challenger also having that, succumbing to the red mist too. On your point about professionalism, earlier there is a section where Roxton says, before you start shooting, make sure you've picked your target. Which, classic, professional
don't just blaze away.
Yeah, you don't just blaze away, although at this point, this is very much what Malone is doing. But it's a very bloodthirsty end to this chapter. It ends with ultimately the ape men being frankly destroyed, and I think the women of the of the ape men, if you can call it that, being essentially enslaved, and the native peoples being put above them, and of course above them are the Europeans. So you get Lord John saying, get up, little chappie, and take your face off my boots.
But you also, I mean, with Roxton, in relation to all of this, the kind of the colder, calculating side of there is an emotionalism in these outbursts. I'm just going to read, but there's calculation, and when he's encountered the ape men and been captured by them, and so on, his attitude goes, by George, I wish I had 50 men with rifles. I'd clear out the whole infernal gang of them and leave this country a bit cleaner than when we found it. And that's not just one outburst. He says the same again later. He goes, for my part, I have a score to settle with these monkey folk.
Yeah.
The phrasing, hold on.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it ends by wiping them off the face of the earth, I don't see that the earth need fret about it.
Yeah.
So again, we know exactly how he behaved with the slavers.
Yeah,
because he's about to do it again, and that's what I mean. It's in him to do this, and he's basically the attitude: if it needs doing, it needs doing, and he doesn't think too much about it. But you've got him doing it. It's a superiority thing that's different to the professors.
Yes, it is.
He's got his view of it, but it's the same as what they're doing. And again, with when you've got Challenger's comments about cranium and so on, you are brought into the world of Lombroso and the enthusiastic eugenicists.
Yeah, yeah.
And you also got this, because it's this expedition. As I was reading this, you're uncomfortably reminded of kind of the Nazi expeditions into Central Asia.
Oh yeah.
With all the measuring equipment.
Oh yeah, it's horrible.
So you've got this going on in this story.
Yeah.
For different approaches, but it's all rather disturbing.
It is, and then you then have the series of jokes back on the whole play of Challenger looking like the ape man. So Challenger at one point is basically saying, "You heard Lord John's describing me as looking a bit like this ape man. So just remember not to put that in your report, otherwise there will be an injunction on it. Which is interesting because, right at the beginning of the preface is all about how the fact that they clearly came to almost legal blows over the text of the Lost World before it was serialized. But I did like the Challenger's last line of this chapter, which is, "The king of the ape men was really a creature of great distinction, a most remarkably handsome and intelligent personality. Did it not strike you?"
We've also got the end of the chat after the final showdown between the Indians and the ape men. The Indians obviously with the Europeans' help, but talking about this kind of the last stand idea, which we've just discussed.
Yeah.
You have this interesting bit that Malone comments. "As we advanced together through the woods, we found the ape men lying thick, transfixed with spears or arrows. Here and there a little group of shattered Indians marked where one of the anthropoids had turned to bay and sold his life dearly." So you've got an echo of the heroic, the ape man heroically echoing. So it's an interesting observation.
Yeah, it is.
And giving a bit of balance.
Yeah, it is. And there's another bit of balance, actually, which is, if we spin to chapter 14, the last chapter we're looking at today, those were the real conquests. This is where Challenger musing on what has happened, and he talks about this genocide of the ape men. Really, this is what it is.
Yeah.
On racial grounds. That this is survival of the fittest taking place in microcosm. This is an unworthy branch of what is a form of humanity has to be wiped out to be able for them to survive. But he then draws this connection back to warfare more broadly. "We have been privileged," he cried, strutting about like a gamecock, "to be present at one of the typical decisive battles of history, the battles which have determined the fate of the world. What, my friends, is the conquest of one nation by another? It is meaningless. Each produces the same result. But those fierce fights, when in the dawn of the ages the cave dwellers held their own against the tiger folk, or the elephants first found that they had a master, those were the real conquests, the victories that count." So he's given this is 1912, given the context, he's basically saying, what is the point? What is the point of all of these sort of the boundary shifting between these different countries in these wars, when in fact the bigger wars, the greater wars in Challenger's sense, will be the wars of evolution.
But it also, I don't know whether this is deliberate, it almost shows Challenger's political naivety, because he's talking about a world that was millions of years back.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas this world is in the context of the outer world, and the moment the Lost World, as is pointed out, once this lot have wandered into the Lost World is lost because it's within a context of an industrialized European background, which he's going to move in.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. And so we end chapter 14 with the European party being victorious on the plateau, but left with the problem of how on earth do they get back and tell the rest of the world of their great successes. So that will be the focus of our next episode. If you'd like to read more about this story, then do check out the show notes, which you can find at doingsofdoyle.com. And you can also find out at the website about how to become a patron or supporter of the podcast. So until next month, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Good grief. It's a Stegosaurus. A splendid specimen. No, don't shoot. I want to take a good look at it.
Be careful, Doctor.
Don't worry, Brigadier. It's a vegetarian.